I've got the profile. Male narrator, 60 plus, first person, American audience. Addressing them by relationship terms, like folks, friend, direct relational address, rather than generic guys. Let me write this as a complete to 5000 word story, following the proven structure with entirely new characters and setting. I've buried a lot of things in 61 years. A father, a mother, a business partner, a golden retriever named Duke, who slept at the foot of my bed for 14 years. I thought I knew what it felt like to lose something and keep walking anyway. I didn't know a thing. Because the day I lost my marriage, I was sitting in a folding chair in a church basement, holding a paper cup of bad coffee, and nobody in that room even knew it was happening. It didn't happen with a slammed door or a suitcase on the porch. It happened because of a voicemail. A voicemail that wasn't even meant for me to hear, on a phone that wasn't even mine. Friend, if you're just finding this channel, I want you to know something before you go any further. I'm not going to yell at you through this screen. I'm not going to tell you revenge is sweet, because I don't think it is. I think the truth is just heavy. And once you're holding it, you either learn to carry it right, or it breaks your back. So sit with me a minute. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Because I read every single one. And lately it's felt like half the country's been checking in with an old man in Ohio, and I like that. If a story like this one means something to you by the end, go ahead and subscribe, because I've got more of them, and I intend to keep telling them as long as folks keep listening. My name is Walter Anders. Everybody who's known me more than 5 minutes calls me Walt. I'm 61 years old. I spent 33 years as a union electrician before I retired last spring, wired half the office buildings between here and Columbus, and now I putter around a workshop in my garage, building birdhouses I don't need for birds. I don't have, because a man's hands don't know how to be still just because his paycheck stopped. I live in a town called Millbrook, Ohio, population just under 9,000, the kind of place where the hardware store owner knows your name and your father's name too. My wife is Carol, was my wife, I should say, though some days that word still comes out of me like a reflex before I catch it. Carol is 58. For 31 years she taught second grade at Millbrook Elementary, the same school our own 2 kids went through, the same school half this town went through. If you grew up in Millbrook after 1993, chances are Carol Anders taught you your multiplication tables and how to write a proper cursive letter to your grandmother. She's the kind of woman who remembers every student's birthday for a decade after they've left her classroom. She's the kind of woman who organized meal trains for sick neighbors before meal trains had a name. For 31 years of marriage, I thought I had married the most reliable person in the state of Ohio. I want you to sit with that description for a second, friend, because it matters for what comes later. The steadier someone looks from the outside, the more it costs you when you find out the inside was never what you thought. Here's where it starts, and I want to be precise about the date, because precision is going to matter a great deal by the time we're through. It was a Thursday, the 12th of February, and I was at St. Andrew's Lutheran, the church 2 blocks off Main Street, where Carol and I had been members since our wedding in 1994. Every second Thursday of the month, the church basement runs a grief support group. I started going about 8 months back, after my younger brother Dale passed from a stroke nobody saw coming. I never told most people I went. It felt like a private thing, a man's private thing, and Carol knew, but I don't think she thought much of it beyond that. It was just Walt's Thursday thing. That particular Thursday, I'd left my own phone charging on the kitchen counter at home, which I only tell you because it's going to seem like a small detail, and it is not a small detail. A woman in the group, Sheila Renner, whose husband had passed the year before, was showing everybody pictures of a fishing trip on her phone, some new lake up near Sandusky she wanted us all to try. She handed her phone around the circle so we could all see, and when it got to me and I swiped past the lake pictures by accident, a notification had come through, a text message preview, sitting right there on her lock screen, from a name saved in her phone as C. Millbrook. The message said, and I remember every word of it because I read it maybe 6 times, standing there in that basement with a paper cup going cold in my other hand. Can't stop thinking about Thursday. Same time next week? Don't want anyone at the school asking questions. Now, friend, I want to be fair here before you get ahead of me. Sheila Renner is 63 years old, a retired hairdresser, and I had zero reason on God's green earth to think that text had anything to do with me, except for the name, C. Millbrook, and the mention of the school. Carol's the only C in my life connected to a school in Millbrook. I handed the phone back to Sheila without a word, sat through the rest of the meeting hearing maybe one word in 10 of what anybody said, and drove home with both hands so tight on the wheel my knuckles ached the next morning. I didn't say anything that night. Carol had dinner on the table, a pork roast, and she asked how group was, same as she always did, and I said fine, same as I always did, and I watched her set her fork down at the same angle she always set it down, and I thought about that text message, and I said nothing. That was mistake number one, though it wouldn't be my last. I want to pause the story here, because there's a part of me, the electrician part, that likes things wired correctly, in the right order, so you understand exactly how I got from a stranger's phone to where this story ends up. So let me back up 11 days, to February the 1st, because that's when the first loose wire showed itself, even though I didn't know it yet. Carol had started, about 3 months prior, volunteering 2 evenings a week at what she called the literacy program downtown, helping adults get their GED certificates in reading and writing. I thought it was wonderful. I told our daughter Renee it was wonderful. Carol had always been the type to give her Sunday afternoons to somebody else's kid, so giving her Tuesday and Thursday evenings to somebody else's education tracked exactly with who she'd always been. She'd come home a little after 9 those nights, smelling like the instant coffee they must have kept in the church annex where the program met, and she'd tell me little stories. A man in his 50s who'd finally passed his reading test, a young mother trying to get her diploma so she could apply for a better job. I believed every word of it, because there was no reason in 31 years to build the habit of doubting her. The name of the man who ran that literacy program, Carol told me once in passing, months before any of this, was Gary Prentice. I remembered the name only because Carol mentioned once that Gary had been a guidance counselor before he retired and started the program, and I'd thought, good for him, a man who doesn't know how to sit still in retirement either. I filed it away and never thought of it again, until 11 days after Sheila Renner's phone. That Thursday, February the 12th, was a literacy program night. Carol had left the house at 6:40, same as always. I want you to hold that thought next to the text message about Thursdays, and next to a school, and next to somebody worried about people asking questions. It took me the better part of a week to let that thought sit in the same room as the others. I didn't confront anybody. What I did instead, and I'm not proud of the sneaking, though I understand now why I did it, was I started paying attention the way I used to pay attention to a panel box before I trusted it not to short out on me. Small things. Carol had started locking her phone with a passcode about 4 months back, something she'd never done before. And when I asked her about it once, casual as I could manage, she said the school had a new policy about student data privacy, and the IT department told all the teachers to lock their devices. Reasonable. Believable. I believed it for 4 months. On the 19th of February, a Thursday literacy program night, I did something I'm not going to pretend was admirable. I followed her. Not close, not reckless, just far enough back in my truck to see which direction she turned out of our neighborhood. She didn't turn toward downtown, toward the church annex where the literacy program supposedly met. She turned toward County Road 9, out past the edge of town, toward a stretch of newer construction, single-story homes on half-acre lots that had gone up maybe 6-7 years back. I watched her car turn into the driveway of a gray house with a wraparound porch, and I watched a man come out onto that porch to meet her before she'd even made it to the door. Even from 100 yards back, in the dark, headlights off, I knew that wasn't a literacy program. I drove home. I did not go up to that porch. I did not knock on that door. I sat in my own driveway for what felt like an hour and turned out, when I checked my phone, to be closer to 20 minutes. And I thought about my brother Dale, who never got a warning before his stroke took him, never got a chance to set anything right. And I decided I wasn't going to waste whatever time I had left being a fool in the dark about my own life. Here's the thing, friend. that still sits strange with me even now. When Carol came home that night around 9:15, smelling like instant coffee, same as always, I hugged her at the door, same as always. I asked how group went. She said a woman named Doreen finally passed her reading exam and cried right there at the table. And wasn't that something? I said that was something. I did not say a word about a gray house on County Road 9. That was the start of 2 weeks I don't think about with any pride. 2 weeks of driving her to her hair appointment, 2 weeks of splitting the crossword with her at breakfast, 2 weeks of a man who already knew and hadn't said so, because I think, if I'm honest with you, the way I try to be honest with everybody who watches these stories, I wasn't ready for it to be real yet. Knowing something in your gut and saying it out loud are two different kinds of true. The person who noticed something had shifted in me before I let myself admit it out loud was my son, Michael. He's 29, works as a paramedic over in Dayton, and comes by most Sundays to help me get the truck ready for winter or just sit on the porch with a beer and talk about nothing in particular. That Sunday, the 22nd of February, he sat down next to me on the porch steps and didn't say anything for a good 5 minutes, which for Michael is a kind of loud silence, because that boy has never once in his life been quiet without a reason. Finally, he said, "Dad, you've been someplace else for about 2 weeks now." I told him it was nothing, just some things on my mind about retirement, money, that kind of thing. He didn't push. He just said, "Whatever it is, you know where to find me." And he stayed another hour and helped me change the truck's oil, though it didn't need changing yet, just so I'd have company while I sat with whatever I was sitting with. That's Michael. He's said some version of that to me more times than I can count, since he was maybe 16 years old, and he's never once asked for a single thing back for it. If you've got somebody in your life who shows up like that, without being asked, without keeping score, I hope you'll tell them so tonight. Put it in the comments who that person is for you. It matters more than most of us say out loud. The switch didn't flip because I was angry. Not exactly. It flipped on the morning of February the 26th, a Wednesday, when I was going through our joint checking account to reconcile it against a new budget I was trying to set up, now that my pension checks had started coming in instead of a paycheck. That's a task, friend, that 30 years of marriage teaches you to do without much thought, because you know every line on that statement the way you know your own front porch steps. Except there was a line I didn't know. A monthly automatic transfer, $340 every month, going out to something called Prentice Property Holdings, LLC, dated back 19 months. 19 months, friend, not 2 weeks. Not 2 months. 19 months of $340 a month, leaving our joint account, and I had never once noticed it, because it was dressed up to look. On the statement, almost exactly like our homeowner's insurance line, off by one letter if you weren't looking close. I didn't say a word to Carol. What I did instead was drive out to the county recorder's office the next morning, which anybody in Ohio can do, because property records are public, and I asked the clerk to pull up anything filed under the name Prentice Property Holdings, LLC. Turned out that gray house on County Road 9, the one with the wraparound porch, had been purchased 14 months earlier, and Carol's name was on the deed. Not as a resident, as a co-owner. My wife of 31 years owned half a house I had never once set foot in, with a man named Gary Prentice, and she'd been paying her half of it, quietly, out of an account with my name on it too, for the better part of a year and a half. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long while after I saw that filing, and I want to tell you what went through my head, because I think it matters more than the anger did. What went through my head was Dale, my brother, who worked 40 years at a foundry and was 3 years from retirement when his heart just stopped one morning making coffee. No warning, no chance to set a single thing in order the way he would have wanted it. And I thought, I am not going to be a man who finds out too late what was actually true about his own life. I am not going to let this run one more month on autopilot while I try to work up the nerve to be angry about it properly. I didn't confront her that day either. Instead, I called an old friend of mine, a man named Harold Kessler, who'd handled my will and the paperwork on my electrical business for over 20 years and had gone on to specialize in estate law after his own boy passed the bar. I sat in Harold's office on County Road 4, about as far from that gray house as I could manage to feel, and I told him everything. The text on Sheila's phone, the gray house, the LLC, the 19 months. Harold didn't say much. He asked me twice if I was certain I wanted to move forward with rewriting my estate plan, and I told him I had never in my life been more certain of anything, including the day I married her. Here's what I changed, and I want to walk you through it slow, the way Harold walked me through it, because every piece of it mattered to me. The house on Larkspur Lane, the one Carol and I had lived in for 26 years, the one we'd raised Renee and Michael in, I split it so that upon my passing, it would go entirely to our 2 children, in trust, with no claim whatsoever remaining to Carol. My electrical business, which I'd sold 2 years back, for a fair sum that had been sitting comfortably invested since, I redirected in 3 parts. A third to Renee outright, because our daughter had been putting herself through nursing school these past 2 years while raising a boy of her own alone, and she'd never once asked me for a dime of help. A third to Michael, because that boy has spent his whole career hauling strangers back from the edge of dying for a wage that barely covers his rent, and it was time somebody looked after him for once. And the last third, I want to tell you about this one specially, because it mattered to me more than almost anything else in this whole story. I put toward a scholarship fund at Millbrook Elementary, in my late brother Dale's name, for kids whose families couldn't afford the class trips and the extra supplies. Dale never had kids of his own. He always said the neighborhood kids were close enough. I figured this was a way of making that true for good. Carol's name, which had been the sole beneficiary on my life insurance policy since 1996, came off entirely. It took Harold's office 11 business days to finalize everything. Carol found out on a Tuesday afternoon, March the 4th, when she went to pull up some old paperwork about the life insurance for what she believed was a routine review ahead of our joint tax filing. I understand now, from talking with Harold afterward, that the moment she saw her name gone, she called my cell phone 11 times inside of an hour. By the time I finally picked up, it had climbed to 26 missed calls. She had absolutely no notion of what was coming, friend. None at all. I met her at the house that evening, a Wednesday, March the 5th, 6 o'clock, same time I'd always come in for dinner for 31 years. She was already talking before I got my coat off. How could I do this? Was I trying to punish her? Did I not trust her after everything we'd built together? I let her get all the way through it, every word, standing there in the kitchen where she'd cooked me 1,000 dinners. Then I set a single piece of paper on the counter between us. It was the property filing for the gray house on County Road 9. Prentice Property Holdings, LLC. Her name, right there in the county's own handwriting, so to speak. She stopped talking. I told her about Sheila Renner's phone, and the text about Thursdays, and the school. I told her about the $340 a month for 19 months. I told her I'd driven past that gray house myself and watched a man come out onto the porch to meet her before she'd even reached the door. My voice didn't rise once through any of it. It didn't need to. I watched her cry, standing in that kitchen, and I want to be honest with you, the way I try to be honest in every one of these stories I tell. I didn't feel the old pull to go comfort her. Not coldness, exactly. More like a phone line finally going dead quiet after years and years of static you'd stopped noticing was even there. She asked if there was any way to undo the changes to the estate. I told her Harold had made certain there wasn't, and that was the truth of it. What I did not expect, and what I take no particular credit for, was watching the whole thing with Gary Prentice come apart entirely on its own, without my having to lift a finger toward it. Carol, in her panic that same evening, called him from our kitchen, on speaker, forgetting or maybe not caring anymore that I was standing right there. And Gary, who I came to understand had believed, because Carol had told him so, that our divorce had already been finalized the previous fall, said something on that call he never intended for a husband to hear. Something about how he couldn't have any of this coming back on the literacy program, on his name in this town, on the retirement he'd built his whole reputation around. Turned out Gary Prentice wasn't only a man carrying on with a still married woman. He was a man who'd used a genuine, good literacy program, one that had actually helped people like Doreen pass her reading exam, as cover for a year and a half of lies, and who'd been letting a married woman put her name and her husband's money on a piece of property he owned with her under the table the whole time. I didn't call the literacy programs board out of spite, friend. And I want you to believe me on that, because spite was never really the engine driving any of this. I called them because there were other people, other volunteers, other families trusting that program with their evenings and their good faith, and they deserved to know what their director had actually been building behind that porch. The board looked into it. Gary stepped down within the month. Carol moved out at the end of March. The house on Larkspur Lane got quieter in a way I did not hate, not one bit, though I won't pretend the quiet didn't take some getting used to after 31 years of somebody else's breathing in the next room. Renee still talks to her mother most weeks. I never asked her to stop, and I never will, because that forgiveness or lack of it isn't mine to hand out on our daughter's behalf. That's hers to carry, however she decides to carry it. I won't sit here and tell you I feel some soft, tidy kind of peace, because that wouldn't be honest. And I promised you at the start of this I'd try to be honest with you all the way through. What I feel, most days now, is steadier. I don't check the mileage on her old car anymore. I don't wonder about gray houses or literacy programs or $340 a month. I go to a different grief group now, over in the next county, a smaller one, run by a widower named Frank, who lost his own wife to cancer 11 years back and never remarried, and there's no phone passed around that circle at all anymore. We just talk, plain, the way men my age were never taught to but ought to have been. If there's a lesson in any of this, friend, and I think there is, it isn't really about revenge, whatever the title of this video might have promised you. It's that the quiet years are the ones that carry the truth, if you're willing to actually look at them instead of past them. The $340 a month, nobody questions because it looks close enough to something familiar. The volunteer evenings you never once ask a follow-up question about, because 31 years of trust doesn't leave much room in your head for suspicion. The passcode you accept an easy explanation for because the alternative is too heavy to hold. Pay attention to your own quiet years. That's where the truth is usually sitting, waiting on you to finally look. If this story meant something to you tonight, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more of these, because I've got plenty. And tell me, in the comments, has the truth in your own life ever shown up in the smallest, most ordinary detail? A line on a bank statement, a name on a phone screen, something so small you almost didn't catch it? I read every single comment. Friend, every one of them. I'll see you in the next story.